All right, so our next speaker is Gene Callahan, and the talk that he's going to be giving is Staffing Your DevOps Organization, Agile Development and the Division of Labor. Eugene is an industry associate professor of comp sci at NYU, and he's author of a couple of books, Economics for Real People, and Oakeshott on Rome and America. So, Gene, thanks for coming. Appreciate your time. Look forward to your talk. Thanks.
Greetings. Thanks for coming out tonight. Richard gave us a nice talk with lots of practical things. I guarantee you, as a break, there'll be nothing practical in my talk at all. You don't have any fear that you could actually apply anything of this. So there's a little break for you. This could have been called DevOps and the Division of Labor, but I had the picture of the cheetah already, and the cheetah looked very agile, but I had trouble figuring out how I could make the cheetah look DevOps. So I went with Agile Development in the Division of Labor. So the way this topic came about for me, I was a software developer for 20 years. I went back, did graduate school in the social sciences, wrote papers and books and so forth in that area, wound up back in the world of computer science and software again through some torturous paths. And occasionally I stop and think, how does what I'm doing now and the kind of ideas I'm looking at relate to things that I learned during the time I was studying the social sciences? So we start out with the puzzle that that led me to do this work. A famous principle in economics is the productivity gains of the division of labor. The person who most famously pointed this out was Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations. It's probably the most important thing he talks about in that book. There's an essay by Leonard Read called I, Pencil, which gives very short and striking illustration of the importance the idea the division of labor has for economists. If you haven't read it, it's quick, it's on the internet, and someone did a kind of melodramatic video of it too. But Read talks about, he starts out by saying, nobody in the world knows how to make a pencil. Sounds kind of silly. There are millions, billions of pencils around. Someone must know how to make them, right? If you understand what he's saying, though, it's, of course, as we'll see, there are people who know how to orchestrate the process of creating a pencil. But it's true, there's no one in the world who could make, something as simple as this little yellow pencil, even if you plopped all the raw materials in front of them. There's no person in the world who knows all of the techniques and skills that go into making that. As Reed points out, he spends time going through all the various ingredients: cedar, lacquer, graphite, ferrule, that's the little ring near the eraser. Factus, I had to look that one up. That's something used in making rubber. Pumice, wax, glue, and he talks about how what we need is shipping companies and railroads and people making iron and steel and people making chainsaws and so forth. A fantastic background of a multitude of tasks goes into this pencil. The historically most famous example, Adam Smith talks about a pin factory, and he says there's this crudely provisioned pin factory in Scotland. He's Scottish. And even with these basic tools, they had 10 workers able to make 48,000 pins a day. And this is 1776 that the book comes out, so it's sometime earlier than 1776. And he says a single worker working on their own without this division of labor could scarce make 10 or 20 pins. So we have an increase in productivity through the division of labor, and this is, again, the 1770s, of a factor of something like 50 times. He's a little bit imprecise, and that's fine. The point comes home that it's a big, big increase. So one of the things, the thing that got me contemplating this topic was that in lean, agile, DevOps, to some extent, we're seeing somewhat of a reversal of this process. So this seemed to me a curious thing, something worth thinking about. Why is it that we have a stress on people who are more broadly knowledgeable and have more general knowledge? Are we going to lose the productivity gains of the division of labor when we reverse this process? What should we think about this? Is there anything, a broader implication we can draw? So I'll put out a clue here at the start. And even in Adam Smith's pin factory, there was still someone who had a holistic view of what was going on. There had to be, because the person who was merely welding the heads, or however you get the head on a pin — I've never worked in a pin factory, I must confess. So something process, I guess it's welding, puts the pin head on the pin. That person is doing a very simple task, but how do they know that's the task they should do? How do we know we need a little round head on the pin rather than a flat head? Or maybe we need no heads on pins. Maybe we need a triangular head. Maybe the head should actually be plastic as it is today. They didn't have that option then. Or maybe the head should be made of gold because people would really value that, or diamond, so it's very hard. How do we know that what we need is a tiny little round metal head? Someone is taking a holistic view of the whole process and deciding these things at a higher level. The technical name, now I'm going to use this word in a technical sense, a sense drawn from the work of Ludwig von Mises and Israel Kirzner, two economists I studied a fair amount. And entrepreneur typically in common talk is someone who starts up a company. That's a fine usage. I'm not trying to dispute that usage. But what Mises and Kirzner are talking about when they talk about the entrepreneur is the person who has an insight that the current way things are being done is subject to essentially a costless improvement, because we've just missed the fact that we could do something a little better than we are at present. So to Kirzner and Mises, entrepreneurship is not just a special role people who start companies play, and they acknowledge that meaning. They're not trying to dispute that, but it's something they're talking with a different meaning. I often think they should have used another term to avoid confusion, but they say that it's entrepreneurship is an aspect of all human action. It's alertness to the possibility of improvement from the way we're doing things now by doing things in some different fashion. By the way, I'm trying to push web presentation because to me it's kind of a DevOps way of doing it. I can keep everything in text files, and it's easy to share parts of my presentation and so forth. It's coming along. It's not as fancy as PowerPoints or anything yet, but I'm happy with the progress I'm making, and I'm going to try to keep pushing that. So that's why you're looking at a web page. So during the 20th century, we saw an extreme in the division of labor. Workers on an assembly line were actively discouraged from thinking holistically about the whole production process. The attitude was, keep your head down, do your job. Don't butt into the people in the upper office's job. What this was doing was, in essence, turning humans into machines on an assembly line. At that point, there's no advanced robotics or anything. So your best bet, if you needed a machine to continually put a little nut onto a bolt or something, you got a human being to keep doing that. I actually worked on an assembly line at Nivea skin cream, and I just put caps on jars, right? So I was just a machine that was taking a cap, screwing it on a jar, taking a cap, screwing it on a jar. No thought was required. Marx would put it that the workers here are alienated from their product because it's very hard to connect the activity of simply putting a bolt in a car with the final product of the car. The worker doesn't feel, probably doesn't feel a whole lot of pride in like, I made this car. No, I just bolted a piece of metal to another piece of metal repeatedly. In fact, Adam Smith was a very clever man and wasn't a pitch man for this. He was studying it, but he saw that there were downsides. And right in The Wealth of Nations, he says, in the progress of division of labor, the employment of the far greater part of those who live by labor comes to be confined to a very few simple operations, frequently to one or two. But the understandings of the greater part of men are necessarily formed by their ordinary employments. The man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations has no occasion to exert his understanding. He naturally loses, therefore, the habit of such exertion and generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible to become for a human creature. We have too many becomes there. So Smith saw a downside to this, and certainly people doing this kind of repetitive job viewed the job as a source of money, but very few people said, wow, it's so wonderful that I get to put this bolt into these two pieces of metal all day. What we have in the mid-20th century, we saw an extreme of central planning was the vogue in governments. We had Soviet Union and China engaged in extensive central planning, but US corporations were trying very much the same thing in the context of a large corporation where everything would flow from the top down. Knowledge existed at the top, and the people below that were supposed to carry out the plans of the people up in the central office who made them. Taylorism was very explicit about this. This was one of the early forms of scientific management. It was replacing the implicit knowledge of workmen with mass production methods, developed, planned, monitored, and controlled by managers. Under scientific management, this is Taylor himself, the managers assume the burden of gathering together all the traditional knowledge which in the past has been possessed by the workmen, and then of classifying, tabulating, and reducing this knowledge to rules, laws, and formula. Thus, all the planning which under the old system was done by the workmen must of necessity under the new system be done by management in accordance with the laws of science. We have a quote from Daniel Bell, how General Motors' managerial structure was intended to draw all the brain power away from the factory floor. Everything was centered in the planning and schedule and design departments. The waterfall model in software, to my mind, is an attempt to put this in place for software development. What we have is there's a small team of analysts. They're going to have all of the real thinking that goes on. They're going to see what the needs of the entire product in its final form, and they're going to produce a big analysis document, give it to the coders. They're basically, almost translation machines who are going to translate the analyst's work into COBOL. In mid-century, these ideas were already, the weakness in these ideas was already becoming apparent. I cite F.A. Hayek's essay, The Use of Knowledge in Society. He points out the very important point that every person is an expert on their own circumstances of time and place. And what we had was people trying to get around this. And of course, we first see this, Toyota realizes this in the process of car manufacturing, that what they can't do is innovate rapidly unless they bring the people on the factory floor, they bring their knowledge and their creativity into play, because to innovate rapidly, they're going to have to keep reconfiguring the process of building the cars. And the people who have the knowledge of that are the people on the factory floor who have the knowledge of their own particular circumstances of time and place. This is true of innovation in the automobile industry, as Toyota realized. It's even more true for the software industry because there's no real equivalent of mass manufacturing of a single model in software. That's just copying disks, copying files, right? Software development is always the development of new and unique products. Otherwise, we'd just buy it if we needed something that was already developed. It's almost always cheaper to buy it if someone's already made what we need. So it's natural that the involvement of the workers and the engagement of the workers' intelligence and creativity that Toyota found necessary to innovate in the automobile industry was going to be, I think, even more important in software. So with DevOps, we have a breakaway from this increasing specialization, this increasing division of labor. To some extent, we can view it as a comeback of craft work. Everyone who's a software developer has a great resemblance to a craftsman, what a craftsman would have known, someone making furniture, say, in the 19th century, before furniture was largely manufactured on assembly lines. However, there is a significant difference, and that's the programmable all-purpose computer. Because what we have is this method by which we can repeatedly automate more and more processes as we come to understand what they are. As, you know, I basically find myself, if I've run the same 3 shell commands in a row 3 times, I go, why haven't I written a shell script yet, right? We can keep automating these processes. So as I contemplated this, I realized that what we're witnessing is a transition where the roles, where people in the automated factory of the mid-20th century were being used as machines, as part of the assembly line. Today, increasingly, we can hand that job over to software. And what this does is increasingly allows us to take our more proper place, I would say, in a production process, which is as Aristotle would have called us, rational animals. Basically, what we're seeing is an increased demand for entrepreneurial thinking on the part of every employee, and a decrease in the importance of being able to do repetitive tasks because the machine can take those over. So what makes someone valuable in the software production process is more and more their ability to see that there's this thing we're not doing right now that would improve or relieve pain for this division of our business, allow us to reach these customers more rapidly, solve this problem our customers are having. And this is entrepreneurial thinking, as Mises and Kerzner would have it. So with lean, agile DevOps, we're seeing a transition where the extreme division of labor is being handed off to software as infrastructure, shell scripts, Ansible, Jenkins, so forth, all these tools, and people are being valued more and more for their ability to think entrepreneurially, to think creatively about the process that's going on, and to spot areas where that process can be improved to bring more value to the organization. So we have a brief look at the DevOps tool chain. So what we have, the use of the DevOps tools seen from this perspective, is that by automating these processes, they free up people's minds to think entrepreneurially about the entire process and to increasingly take a more holistic view of the entire process from idea to customer satisfaction. So we engage in continuous testing, right? So the testers can come into the process from day one and right from the start can be thinking about what kind of things would most trouble our customers if they went wrong in the software. We're going to keep evolving these products in response to customer needs. We're going to need software as infrastructure so we can rapidly deploy with reliability. We need continual interaction between the engineers and the business people because with this rapidly innovating product, the business people need to be continually aware of what is going on with the software so that they can spot places where the engineers have misunderstood the business needs, where there's a new business need and the original spec doesn't handle it, where a new market has opened up and we can reach out to that new market if we just change our spec in this way. And I put business in scare quotes there. Tom Poppendick says, as developers, we should think that we are not developing software, we're doing something larger, and software is just part of the solution. So the larger thing, we're trying to help our organization achieve its goals better. So this is the higher holistic view. How well this software is achieving these goals can't be known without continual feedback from the users. Thus, we want incremental development, so we get small batches out to the users and they can give us feedback rapidly. Continuous deployment. Incremental development, meaning we can change course easily. Continuous deployment, getting feedback from the users rapidly on the small batches. Continuous monitoring so that we can, with confidence, put software into production, knowing that any problems we see will be found rapidly. So in this view, the entire DevOps tool suite becomes a way for the development organization to think entrepreneurially, to continually look at responding to customer needs and perceiving, creating new things that will fulfill needs customers didn't even know they had, and be able to do this rapidly, get the products out into the customer's hands, get feedback, and make sure we're doing this with reliable products. So I know in DevOps, when I got back into the software world, I listened to about 80 episodes of the DevOps Cafe podcast, something like that. I had long drives at the time. I listened, each drive was a couple hours. I'd get through 2 or 3 episodes. And one thing after a few months of this, I said, they sure do like to talk about silos, don't they? So I went and found some images of silos. These are actually, I think, ancient Mayan silos. I thought they were very cool-looking silos, though. I wouldn't have, I had no idea there were any silos built like this. So if we're always breaking down silos, right, and everyone is taking a broader, more holistic view of their role in the organization, how does this relate to the need? As we see, we have these very specialized tools, compliance tools and testing tools and containers and automated deployment tools and so on. And there's ever increasing amounts of specialized knowledge. So what do we do with the tension between this request to break down silos and this increasing need for specialization? So as I said, part of what's going on is that to the extent possible, we keep pushing this need for specialization into the software and automate it. So we let the machines handle the need for specialization to leave us time to think about the broader process, the organization's health and goals as a whole. But this obviously is not going to do away with the need for people who have detailed knowledge of these specialized areas. That need is increasing. Scott Ambler has coined the term generalizing specialists. He has been developing the disciplined Agile framework. I think this term nicely captures what I see as what we increasingly need in our organizations to fulfill these dual roles. So what we're going to find, I think, more and more is people who have deep knowledge of some specialty, such as compliance, such as automated testing, such as deployment, such as the Linux kernel, Python coding, Django web servers, et cetera, et cetera. But while maintaining this specialty and their knowledge in that, they're able to gradually broaden their view and begin to see things at the level of the entire enterprise. Yes, sir. Yeah, I don't think there's any problem working it from either end. I think, yeah, no, I think you could work it from either end, right? What Stuart Brand famously said, someone said, well, you're really a generalist, aren't you? And he said, well, a generalist is a specialist in the surface of things. So I don't think there's any problem coming at it from that angle. I suspect Ambler just thinks that more people are likely to start out as detailed specialists, and he's trying to encourage them to, okay, you've mastered your specialty, now start, how does your deployment software fit in with the unit testing? How does it fit in with Docker containers? And how do and more importantly, all those things, how do they fit in with what your enterprise is trying to achieve? So that's the ultimate thing. That's thinking entrepreneurially. What we need are people who have a specialty, but who are also increasingly taking an entrepreneurial view of what's going on in their organization. Yes, sir. Well, I think Hayek had a lot of brilliant insights. I don't think he was always right about everything. And one of the things that I experienced was my last full-time software engineering gig. I was in a trading company, and I was supporting a team of option traders. My desk was maybe 100 feet from where they sat. And the way we developed software, I would walk out onto the trading floor, say, okay, guys, how's it working? Anything else you want? And they go, yeah. If we click on this, could you pop up a window that does this? Go, yes, I can. I'd walk back to my office. I'd program for 2 hours. I'd walk back out to the trading floor. I'd say, reload it. And they would reload it. And I'd go, is that the window you want? And they would say, yes, or no. No, it needs to be orange or bigger or whatever. And I'd go back and do it. And, this was the outcome of a number of years of programming experience, that I had realized that I could develop software more reliably, be much more responsive to the users doing these small batches. So when I came back to software development and began hearing this, it's like, I had friends who were doing this as well, and we would write some articles. And part of what I felt was our way of doing it won. And of course, there's all sorts of stuff I've learned from Lean, Agile, DevOps. I'm not trying to say, well, I knew it all back then. But the basic approach, I learned from Bell Labs, right? The Unix guys in the 70s, what were they doing? They were saying, make small tools that do a single job, deliver it, minimum viable product, deliver it to the users fast, get it out there, then see what else they need. Based on their feedback, now add a new switch to LS, right? I think that there's decades of experience where people have developed software successfully this way, and I think we've got good explanations as to why it works. So whether, 20 or 30 years from now, there'll be new marketing terms probably, but I think, the guys at Bell Labs were never using the words lean or agile or DevOps, right? But they had these ideas, the core idea already. And because, Toyota was seeing this with car manufacturing, I think it's that much more true with computers because we have so much more flexible of a machine. We reconfigure it on the fly with software instead of having to retool. So I think that the insights behind this are sound. This method allows us to respond to the needs of the people we're creating this stuff for much more rapidly. Well, the waterfall model, that type of development, I don't know what year exactly someone coined the term waterfall, but it pre-existed the development of Unix. And the Unix guys were countering this culture already in the 70s. And it really was not widely accepted as a way of doing things. Before I got this great experience working with these option traders, I once spent 3 years working in a company without a single line of code I had ever written, ever reaching a customer. That was a very, very depressing 3-year stretch professionally. So certainly it's true, we want to plan in advance as much as we can. But I think lean, agile, DevOps involve recognizing a limit on how much we're going to be able to plan in advance. That we can't lock it down because business is changing rapidly, because a new competitor we didn't even know about just put up their website, because the regulations changed, because consumer taste changed, and we have to be flexible to be able to respond to these. There's certainly nothing wrong with planning as much as you can in advance. And certainly you can go too far if someone comes to think, well, this means just wing it, right? Just tack, right? No, that's not the idea. That's not the idea the Bell Labs guys had. That's not the idea the people who are good and know what they're doing in Agile and DevOps have. So the core, the kernel of benefit in the waterfall model is you should plan as much as you can in advance. But that's going to be limited. If you really want to be responsive, if you really want to adjust to changing conditions, you have to realize that the plans have to be subject to change. Yeah, Unix was often criticized. I remember, I began working on Unix in the 80s, and it was going away because it wasn't this grand architected system, and there was always something better that was designed from a more complete plan. So that's another thing that's kind of interesting to see how much Unix has stayed the course, in its many variants and won, right? So I think that's a wonderful illustration of the benefits of incremental development and the downfall. Again, there's nothing wrong with planning as much as you can, but don't think that your grand plan for 5 years of developing a great OS is going to last 5 years, because a whole bunch of things you can't foresee will have changed during that time, right? Anything else? All right, well, thank you very much. Glad I could come here.